The summer of 1987 was hot like most summers in the small town of Millerville. Kids would spend their days riding bikes, playing in sprinklers, and trying to stay cool under big oak trees. For 8-year-old Riley, this Tuesday started just like any other day. Her grandmother, who everyone called Nana, had asked her to walk to Miller's corner store to buy a cold drink and some snacks. The store was only 3 blocks away from their small white house on Cherry Street. Riley loved these little trips because Mr. Miller always gave her extra penny candy and asked about school. "Now you be careful, baby girl," Nana said as she handed Riley $2 bills. "Take your time walking and stay on the sidewalk. Come straight home when you're done." Riley nodded and gave her grandmother a quick hug. She was wearing her favorite yellow sundress and white sneakers that squeaked a little when she walked. Her hair was pulled back in 2 neat braids with bright ribbons that Nana had tied that morning. The walk to the store was pleasant. Riley waved to Mrs. Johnson, who was watering her flower garden. She stopped to pet a friendly orange cat that lived near the mailbox on 2nd Street. Everything felt normal and safe, just like always. At Miller's corner store, she picked out a grape soda from the cold case and grabbed a small bag of chips. Mr. Miller smiled when he saw her. "How's your Nana doing today, Riley?" he asked while counting her change. "She's good. She's making her famous apple pie for tonight," Riley replied, carefully putting the coins in her pocket. "You tell her I said hello, okay?" "I will, Mr. Miller. See you later." Riley left the store feeling happy. The cold soda felt good in her hands, and she was excited to share the chips with Nana while they watched their favorite TV show together. Instead of taking the same route home, Riley decided to walk down Maple Street. It was a quieter road with nice houses and big front yards. She had walked this way before with Nana, and it was actually a little shorter than going back the way she came. The afternoon sun was getting lower, but it was still very warm. Riley took small sips of her grape soda and enjoyed looking at the different houses. Some had beautiful gardens, others had swing sets in the backyard where she could hear kids playing. She was about halfway home when she first heard the sound. It started as a low rumble in the distance like thunder from a faraway storm, but this wasn't thunder. As the sound got louder, Riley realized it was motorcycles. Living in a small town, Riley was used to hearing different vehicles. Trucks, cars, even the occasional motorcycle would drive through Millerville. But this sound was different. It was louder, rougher, and there seemed to be more than one bike. Riley kept walking, not thinking much about it at first. She was focused on not dropping her soda and thinking about what she and Nana would watch on TV later, but the rumbling sound kept getting closer and closer. When she looked over her shoulder, she could see 3 large motorcycles coming down Maple Street behind her. They were still far away, but they seemed to be moving slowly, not like they were, just passing through town. Riley felt a little nervous but kept walking. She told herself they were probably just regular people going somewhere, maybe to the gas station or to visit friends. There was no reason to worry. But as the motorcycles got closer, something felt wrong. The riders were wearing dark leather jackets and bandanas. Their bikes were loud and decorated with flags and symbols that Riley didn't understand. They didn't look like the friendly neighbors she was used to seeing around town. The 3 motorcycles pulled up beside her, moving very slowly now. Riley tried to walk faster, but she was just a little girl with short legs. The bikes easily kept pace with her. One of the riders, a man with a long beard and mean-looking eyes, called out to her. The words he used were ugly and hurtful, words that made Riley's stomach feel sick. She had heard some of these words before, whispered by cruel kids at school, but never from adults, and never directed at her like this. Riley's heart started beating very fast. She didn't understand why these men were being so mean to her. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just walking home from the store, like she had done many times before. "Where are you going, little girl?" another rider asked in a voice that didn't sound friendly at all. Riley didn't answer. Nana had taught her not to talk to strangers, especially ones who seemed dangerous. She kept her eyes forward and tried to walk even faster, but her legs felt shaky and weak. The 3rd rider laughed, a sound that made Riley feel even more scared. "She thinks she's too good to talk to us," he said to his friends. Riley wanted to run, but she was afraid that running might make them angry or make them chase her. She also didn't want to drop her soda and chips because Nana was expecting them. Her 8-year-old mind was trying to figure out what to do, but everything was happening so fast. That's when things got much, much worse. The bearded man made a signal to his friends and all 3 motorcycles stopped. The riders got off their bikes and started walking toward Riley. She could see that they had something attached to their motorcycles that she hadn't noticed before. 2 of the men went to the side of their bikes and opened what looked like small trailers or boxes. From inside these containers, they brought out 2 large dogs. These weren't friendly pets like the orange cat she had petted earlier. These were big German shepherd dogs that looked mean and were barking loudly. Riley's grape soda fell from her hands and crashed on the sidewalk, purple liquid splashing everywhere. The bag of chips fell too, and she could hear them crunch under her feet as she took a step backward. The men let the dogs get closer to her while they stood there laughing. The dogs were barking and showing their teeth. Riley had never been so scared in her entire life. She found herself backed up against a chain-link fence that surrounded someone's backyard. The metal felt cold against her back, even though the day was hot. She couldn't go any further. The 3 men and their 2 dogs were in front of her, and the fence was behind her. Riley started to cry. She called out for her Nana, even though she knew her grandmother was too far away to hear. She called for help, hoping that someone in one of the nearby houses would come outside and help her. But when she looked at the houses around her, she could see curtains moving slightly in windows. People were looking out, but nobody was coming to help. The adults in those houses were too scared of the motorcycle riders to get involved. The dogs kept barking and getting closer. One of them snapped its teeth just inches from Riley's leg. She pressed herself harder against the fence, wishing she could somehow disappear or that this was all just a bad dream. The men were saying more cruel words and laughing about what they were doing. They seemed to think that scaring a little girl was funny. They were taking their time, enjoying every moment of Riley's fear. Riley remembered what Nana always told her when she was scared. When you're frightened, baby girl, you pray to God, and you stand up as tall as you can. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Even though she was terrified, Riley tried to stand a little straighter. She wiped the tears from her eyes and tried to be brave like Nana had taught her, but it was so hard when the dogs were so close and the men were being so mean. Just when Riley thought the dogs might actually hurt her, she heard a different sound. It was another engine, but this one was bigger and deeper than the motorcycles. It sounded like a truck or maybe a bus. A large vehicle was coming down Maple Street. Riley couldn't see it clearly because the men and their motorcycles were blocking her view, but she could hear it getting closer. The motorcycle riders heard it too. They turned to look at the approaching vehicle, but they didn't seem worried. They probably thought it was just another person who would drive by without getting involved, like everyone else in the neighborhood. The vehicle stopped right there on Maple Street. Riley heard doors slam shut, and then she heard voices, but these weren't ordinary voices. These were the voices of very large, very confident men. What exactly do you think you're doing to that child? The voice was so loud and commanding that even the dog stopped barking for a moment. Riley couldn't see who was talking, but she could tell that whoever it was, they weren't afraid of the motorcycle riders at all. For the first time since this whole scary situation had started, Riley felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone was finally going to help her. The 3 motorcycle riders turned to face whoever had just arrived. From the looks on their faces, Riley could tell that they weren't expecting this kind of challenge. They had been picking on a little girl thinking no one would stop them, but they were about to learn that they had made a very big mistake. Riley pressed her back against the fence and waited to see what would happen next. Her heart was still beating fast, but now it was beating with hope instead of just fear. Someone had finally come to help her. She didn't know who they were yet, but their voices sounded strong and brave. Maybe, just maybe, this terrible day was about to get better. The grape soda was still making a sticky puddle on the sidewalk, and the chips were still scattered around her feet. But Riley barely noticed these things anymore. All she could focus on was the hope that these new people might be able to help her get away from the mean men and their scary dogs. She stood as tall as she could, just like Nana had taught her, and waited to see what would happen next. The two large men who had just arrived stepped out of what Riley could now see was a big recreational vehicle. These weren't just regular-sized people. These were huge men, the kind of big that made even grown adults look small. They were both well over 6 feet tall and built like they could move mountains if they wanted to. But the motorcycle riders weren't backing down yet. The bearded leader of the group turned toward the newcomers with a nasty smile on his face. "This ain't your business, strangers," he called out. "Just keep driving and pretend you didn't see nothing." The two big men looked at each other, and Riley could see something pass between them. It was like they were having a conversation without words. Then they both started walking closer to where Riley was trapped against the fence. "Actually," said the first man, who was wearing a colorful shirt and had kind eyes, "I think this is exactly our business. We don't like seeing kids get picked on." The second man, who was even bigger than the first, nodded his head. "That's right. Where we come from, real men protect children. They don't scare them." Riley felt a little spark of hope, but she was still terrified. The dogs were still barking and snapping close to her legs. Every time she tried to move even an inch, they would lunge toward her, and she would freeze up again. The motorcycle riders seemed surprised that anyone was challenging them. They were used to people in this small town being too scared to get involved. Most folks would just close their curtains and pretend they hadn't seen anything. "Look here, big shots," the bearded man said, puffing out his chest. "We was just having a little fun with the girl. No harm done. Why don't you get back in your fancy RV and mind your own business?" The larger of the two newcomers took another step forward. His voice was calm but firm. "Fun? You call terrorizing a child with dogs fun? Let me tell you something about fun, friend. Fun is when everyone's laughing, including the person you're playing with. That little girl isn't laughing." Riley could see that the motorcycle riders were getting more aggressive. They didn't like being told what to do, especially by strangers. The second rider, a thin man with tattoos covering his arms, moved closer to his bike where Riley could see he kept some kind of tools. "Maybe you two don't understand how things work around here," the thin man said. "We do what we want when we want. And right now, we want to teach this little girl some manners." That's when things got even worse for Riley. The bearded leader made a hand signal to his friends, and they let the dogs get even closer to her. One of the German shepherds was now so close that Riley could feel its hot breath on her leg. The other dog was circling around, trying to get behind her. Riley pressed herself so hard against the chain-link fence that the metal links were making marks on her back through her yellow dress. She wanted to scream, but she was so scared that hardly any sound came out. Just little whimpering noises like a hurt puppy might make. The motorcycle riders were enjoying this. They were laughing and making comments about how scared Riley looked. They seemed to think that frightening a little girl was the most entertaining thing they had done all day. "Please," Riley finally managed to whisper. "I just want to go home to my Nana." But the men just laughed harder. The bearded leader bent down closer to Riley's face. "Your Nana can't help you now, little girl. Nobody can help you. Everyone in this neighborhood is too chicken to come outside." Riley looked toward the houses around them. She could still see curtains moving in windows, shadows of people watching. But nobody was coming to help. The adults were all too afraid of these dangerous men. The dogs were getting more excited now. They could sense the fear and tension in the air. One of them jumped up and put its front paws on the fence right next to Riley's head. She could see its teeth and the angry look in its eyes. Riley started crying harder. She closed her eyes tight and tried to pretend she was back home with Nana, safe in their little kitchen, eating apple pie and watching TV. But she could still hear the dogs barking and the men laughing. The two big men who had stopped to help were still there, but now the motorcycle riders were facing them instead of focusing only on Riley. This should have made her feel better, but instead it made her more scared. What if these bad men hurt the people who were trying to help her? "I'm going to ask you one more time," said the first of the big men. His voice was getting more serious now. Call off your dogs and leave this child alone." The bearded motorcycle rider just laughed. "Or what? What are you going to do about it, big man? There's 3 of us and only 2 of you, and we got dogs." The second big man, the really huge one, smiled for the first time. But it wasn't a mean smile like the motorcycle riders had. It was confident, like he knew something they didn't. "3 of you, huh?" he said. "Well, that might be a problem made for you." Riley didn't understand what he meant, but something in his voice made her feel a tiny bit safer. These 2 men didn't seem scared at all, even though they were outnumbered. The thin motorcycle rider with all the tattoos reached into a bag on his bike and pulled out a thick chain. He started swinging it slowly like he was getting ready to use it as a weapon. "Maybe you 2 need to learn the same lesson we're teaching the girl," he said with an ugly grin. That's when Riley saw something that made her heart sink. More motorcycles were coming down Maple Street. She could hear the rumbling engines getting louder. At first she thought maybe they were police motorcycles coming to help, but as they got closer, she could see they looked just like the ones that were already there. 2 more motorcycles pulled up and 2 more riders got off. These new men looked just as mean and dangerous as the first 3. Now there were 5 motorcycle riders total, plus the 2 scary dogs. The 2 big men who had stopped to help were now outnumbered even more. Riley was sure they would get back in their RV and drive away. Any smart person would leave now. Before, things got even worse, but neither of the big men moved toward their vehicle. Instead, they both took a step closer to the motorcycle riders. "Well, well," said the bearded leader. "Looks like the odds just got a lot worse for you 2 heroes. Maybe, now you'll get smart and drive away." The first big man looked at his friend, and again Riley saw that silent conversation happening between them. Then he looked back at the motorcycle riders. "You know what?" he said. "I think the odds just got better." Riley didn't understand what he meant. How could things be better when there were now even more bad guys? The huge second man reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a small phone. Riley had never seen a phone that small before. Most phones were attached to walls or had long, curly cords. "I think it's time to make a phone call," he said. The motorcycle riders laughed. "Who you gonna call? Your mama?" But the big man was already dialing numbers. Riley could hear him talking to someone, giving them the address of Maple Street and describing what was happening. The bearded leader's smile faded a little. "Hang up that phone, big man. Nobody needs to get the law involved in this." "Too late," said the man with the phone. "They're already on their way." Now the motorcycle riders looked worried. They hadn't expected anyone to actually call for help. They were used to doing whatever they wanted without anyone standing up to them. But they still had Riley trapped, and the dogs were still dangerously close to her. One of the German shepherds had started growling low in its throat, a sound that made Riley's whole body shake with fear. The new motorcycle riders who had just arrived were looking around nervously. They hadn't expected to find this kind of situation when they showed up. They thought they were just meeting their friends, not getting involved in something that might bring the police. "Maybe we should just leave," one of the new riders said to the bearded leader. "We ain't leaving," the leader snapped back. "Nobody tells us what to do in our own town." But Riley could see that not all of the motorcycle riders felt the same way. Some of them were starting to look uncertain. They kept glancing back at their bikes like they were thinking about leaving. The 2 big men seemed to notice this too. The first one spoke up again, and his voice carried easily across the street. "Your friends are smart," he said to the bearded leader. "They know when it's time to go. Maybe you should listen to them." The leader's face turned red with anger. "I don't take advice from strangers." "Then take it from someone who knows what he's talking about," said the huge man who had made the phone call. "You're making a big mistake here, a mistake you're going to regret." Riley could hear sirens in the distance now. They were still far away, but they were definitely getting closer. The sound of police cars coming toward Maple Street. Some of the motorcycle riders heard the sirens too. They were definitely getting nervous now. What had started as them picking on a helpless little girl was turning into something much bigger and more dangerous for them. But the dogs were still there, still barking and snapping at Riley. and the bearded leader still wasn't backing down. If anything, the approaching sirens seemed to make him more angry and determined. "If the cops are coming, then I guess we better finish what we started," he said with a mean grin. Riley's heart felt like it was going to explode with fear. The sirens were getting closer, but they still weren't close enough. And these two brave men who had stopped to help her were still outnumbered by dangerous people with dogs. She closed her eyes and prayed as hard as she could, hoping that somehow, some way, everything would be okay. But with the dogs so close, and the bad men getting angrier, Riley wasn't sure if help would arrive in time. The sirens were getting louder, but they still seemed far away. Riley was running out of time, and she could see that the bearded motorcycle rider was getting more desperate and angry by the minute. Desperate people do dangerous things, and Riley was right in the middle of it all. The two big men who had stopped to help were still standing their ground, but now they were facing 5 motorcycle riders instead of 3. The odds kept getting worse, but neither of them seemed ready to back down. That's when something incredible happened that changed everything. The larger of the two men, the one built like a mountain, stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was so powerful it seemed to shake the whole street. "My name is Jerome," he said, looking directly at the bearded leader. "But most people know me by a different name. They call me the Junkyard Dog." Riley didn't understand what that meant, but she could see that some of the motorcycle riders did. A couple of them took a step backward, their faces showing surprise and maybe even a little fear. The other big man, the one with the kind eyes and colorful shirt, smiled and nodded to his friend. Then he looked at the motorcycle riders with a confidence that seemed to fill the whole street. "And I'm Virgil," he said in his distinctive voice that somehow sounded familiar, even though Riley had never met him before. "But you might know me better as the American Dream." Now even Riley could see that these names meant something important. The motorcycle riders were looking at each other with expressions of shock and concern. Even the bearded leader seemed less sure of himself than he had been just moments before. "That's right," Jerome continued, his voice carrying easily across the street. "We're professional wrestlers. We make our living fighting people who think they're tough. And right now we're looking at 5 guys who are picking on a little girl with dogs. What do you think that makes you?" The thin motorcycle rider with all the tattoos dropped his chain. It hit the pavement with a loud clang that made Riley jump. His tough guy attitude was disappearing fast. "Look, we didn't know who you were," he said, his voice much quieter than before. We was just having some fun." Virgil shook his head and his expression grew serious. "Fun. Let me tell you something about fun, friend. I've been all over this country, and I've seen what real fun looks like. Real fun doesn't involve grown men scaring children." Jerome took another step closer to the dogs, and something amazing happened. Both German shepherds seemed to sense something different about him. Their barking became less aggressive. They were still alert, but they weren't snapping and lunging at Riley anymore. "Animals can sense things about people," Jerome said calmly. "These dogs know I'm not afraid of them. They can tell I've dealt with much scarier things than a couple of pets with an attitude problem." Riley watched in amazement as Jerome slowly extended his hand toward the closer dog. Instead of biting him, the German shepherd actually sniffed his hand and took a step back. It was like Jerome had some kind of magic power over animals. The bearded leader was getting more frustrated by the minute. His plan to scare a little girl was falling apart, and now he was facing 2 men who were famous for fighting. But he was too proud and too mean to just give up. "I don't care if you're wrestlers or astronauts," he said, trying to sound tough. "This is our town, and we do what we want here." Virgil laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they hear something really silly. "Your town," he said. "Friend, let me tell you something. I've been to every town in America, big and small, and in every single one of them there are good people, and there are bullies. The good people always outnumber the bullies, but sometimes the bullies get loud and think they run things." Jerome nodded and added, "But bullies have one big problem. They're only tough when they're picking on people who can't fight back. When they face someone their own size, they usually fold up like a cheap tent." Riley could see that the other motorcycle riders were getting more and more uncomfortable. They kept looking at their bikes like they wanted to leave. The arrival of two famous wrestlers had completely changed the situation. One of the newer riders, a younger man who looked like he might be new to the group, spoke up nervously. "Maybe we should just go," he said to the bearded leader. "The cops are coming, and these guys are famous. This is going to be all over the news if we don't leave now." The leader spun around and glared at him. "We don't run from nobody." But Jerome had been moving closer during this argument, and now he was close enough to the dogs to do something that shocked everyone. He calmly walked over to the motorcycles and started looking at them like he was shopping for a new bike. "Nice rides," he said casually. "I bet these cost a lot of money. Must have taken years to get them looking just right." Then, without any warning or effort, Jerome grabbed a piece of chrome from the nearest motorcycle and twisted it completely off with his bare hands. The metal made a loud screeching sound as it bent and broke. The motorcycle rider stared in disbelief. That piece of chrome was held on with heavy bolts, and Jerome had just twisted it off like it was made of paper. "Oops," Jerome said with a smile. "My bad. Sometimes I don't know my own strength." He walked to the next motorcycle and did the same thing to a different piece. Then he looked at the third bike and raised his eyebrows like he was asking permission. "Please don't," said the owner of that bike, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then call off your dogs," Jerome replied simply. The bearded leader was furious, but he was also starting to realize that he was in way over his head. These weren't just big guys who had stopped to help. These were professional athletes who were used to handling tough situations. Virgil had been talking quietly into his small phone again, and now he put it away and smiled at the motorcycle riders. "Good news," he said. "The police will be here in about 2 minutes. That gives you just enough time to get on your bikes and ride away. If you leave now, maybe we can convince the officers that this was all just a misunderstanding." The younger rider didn't wait for permission from his leader. He ran to his bike, started it up, and rode away as fast as he could. One of the other riders followed him almost immediately. Now there were only 3 motorcycle riders left, plus the 2 dogs. But the dogs were no longer acting aggressive toward Riley. Jerome's calm confidence had somehow changed their whole attitude. Riley was still pressed against the fence, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. These 2 men, Jerome and Virgil, had turned the whole situation around just by showing up and being brave. The bearded leader made one last attempt to save face in front of his remaining friends. "This ain't over," he said, trying to sound threatening. "We know where you live, little girl. We'll be back." That was a mistake. Both Jerome and Virgil's expressions changed completely. Up until now, they had been firm but relatively patient, but threatening a child crossed a line that these men would not tolerate. Jerome stepped so close to the bearded man that their faces were only inches apart. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but more frightening than any shouting could have been. "Let me make something very clear," he said. "If you or any of your friends ever, and I mean ever, bother this little girl again, you'll have to deal with me. And I promise you that's not something you want to happen." Virgil moved to stand beside his friend, and together they looked like an unmovable wall of muscle and determination. "We're going to be keeping an eye on this town," Virgil added. "We have friends everywhere, and word travels fast in our business. If anything happens to this child, we'll know about it." The 2 remaining motorcycle riders looked at their leader like they were hoping he would finally come to his senses. The sirens were getting very loud now, and they could probably see police cars coming down the street. Jerome walked over to where Riley was still standing against the fence. He knelt down so he could look her in the eyes, and his whole face became gentle and kind. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly. "Are you okay? Did those dogs hurt you?" Riley shook her head, but she was still too scared and shaken up to say much. Jerome smiled and stood up. Then he did something that made Riley feel completely safe for the first time in what felt like hours. He stood directly between her and the motorcycle riders with his arms crossed and his feet planted wide. Virgil moved to stand beside him. Together they created a human wall that completely blocked the bad men from getting anywhere near Riley. "The police will be here any second," Virgil called out to the remaining motorcycle riders. "You can stay and explain to them why you thought it was fun to scare a little girl with dogs, or you can leave now and hope they don't come looking for you later." The bearded leader looked around at his friends, at the twisted motorcycle parts on the ground, at the two famous wrestlers standing guard over Riley, and at the flashing lights that were now visible at the end of Maple Street. For the first time since this whole thing started, he seemed to realize that he had made a very big mistake. The sound of police sirens filled the air as 3 patrol cars turned onto Maple Street, their red and blue lights flashing brightly. In the afternoon sun, Riley had never been so happy to see police cars in her entire life. But even before the officers arrived, Riley already felt safe. She was protected by 2 heroes who had appeared just when she needed them most. The 3 police cars came to a stop right in the middle of Maple Street, their flashing lights painting the whole scene in red and blue. 4 officers got out of their vehicles, and Riley could see that they were taking the situation very seriously. They had their hands near their equipment, ready for whatever they might find. The first officer, a tall man with gray hair who looked like he had been a policeman for many years, walked straight toward the group. His eyes took in everything at once: the motorcycle riders, the 2 big men protecting Riley, the broken motorcycle parts on the ground, and the little girl pressed against the fence. "I'm Officer Martinez," he said in a strong, clear voice. "Someone called and said there was trouble here involving a child. What's going on?" Before anyone else could speak, Jerome stepped forward. Even though he was much bigger than the police officer, he spoke respectfully and calmly. "Officer, my name is Jerome Williams. This is my friend Virgil. We were driving through town when we saw these men threatening this little girl with their dogs." Officer Martinez looked at Jerome more closely, and Riley could see recognition in his eyes. Like many people, he knew who the junkyard dog was. "Mr. Williams," the officer said with a nod, "I've seen you on TV many times. Can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Jerome pointed to where Riley was still standing against the fence. "That little girl was walking home from the store when these men surrounded her with their motorcycles and dogs. They were saying cruel things to her and using their animals to scare her. She couldn't get away." Virgil added, "When we tried to help, more of them showed up. They had chains and were making threats. That's when we called you." Officer Martinez turned to look at the motorcycle riders. The bearded leader was trying to look innocent, but the other 2 men with him looked nervous and guilty. "Is this true?" the officer asked them. "We wasn't doing nothing wrong," the bearded man said, but his voice didn't sound confident anymore. "We was just talking to the girl." "Talking?" Virgil said, his voice showing disbelief. "You call surrounding a child with dogs and making threats talking?" Another police officer, a woman with short brown hair, had walked over to Riley. She knelt down beside the frightened girl and spoke in a gentle voice. "Hi, sweetheart, I'm Officer Thompson. Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you or hurt you in any way?" Riley shook her head, but she was still too scared to say much. The whole experience had been so frightening that she could barely speak. "Officer?" Thompson stood up and looked at the German shepherds, who were now sitting quietly beside the motorcycles. "Whose dogs are these?" she asked. "They belong to us," said one of the motorcycle riders. "But they didn't hurt nobody." "Maybe not," said Officer Martinez. "But using dogs to intimidate a child is still a crime. And from what I can see here, that's exactly what happened." Jerome walked over to where Riley was standing and knelt down beside her, just like Officer Thompson had done. When he spoke to her, his voice was as gentle as if he were talking to his own daughter. "Riley," he said softly, "what's your grandmother's name? We need to call her and let her know you're safe." Riley was surprised that he knew her name, but then she remembered that she had said it earlier when she was asking to go home to her Nana. "Her name is Betty," Riley whispered. "Betty Johnson. We live on Cherry Street." Officer Thompson wrote down this information. "We'll make sure you get home safely," she promised. While the officers were talking to Riley, Officer Martinez was having a very serious conversation with the motorcycle riders. Riley couldn't hear everything they were saying, but she could tell that the men were in big trouble. The bearded leader kept trying to argue, but the other officers had found the chain that one of his friends had dropped. They also took pictures of the broken motorcycle parts that Jerome had twisted off with his bare hands. Destruction of property, intimidation of a minor, disturbing the peace. Officer Martinez was listing off charges. And that's just to start with. We'll probably think of more once we get back to the station. One of the motorcycle riders, the one who had seemed most nervous, started talking fast. Look, officer, this whole thing was Bobby's idea, he said, pointing at the bearded leader. We just came along for the ride. We didn't know he was going to mess with some little kid. The bearded man, whose name was apparently Bobby, glared at his friend. Shut up, Danny, don't say nothing else. But Danny kept talking. No, man, I'm not going to jail because you wanted to scare a little girl. That's messed up. I got kids of my own. Officer Martinez nodded. Well, Danny, if you want to cooperate and tell us exactly what happened, maybe we can work something out. While this was happening, Virgil had walked back to their RV and returned with a bottle of water and some tissues. He handed them to Riley with a warm smile. Here you go, sweetheart. You must be thirsty after all this excitement. Riley took the water gratefully. Her mouth was very dry from being so scared, and the cool water tasted wonderful. She used the tissues to wipe her face, which was still damp from crying. Jerome stood up and walked over to the dogs. Amazingly, both German shepherds came over to him like they were old friends. He petted them gently and spoke to them in a calm voice. These are actually good dogs, he said to Officer Martinez. They were just doing what their owners trained them to do. It's not their fault they were being used to scare people. What should we do with them? The officer asked. Well, Jerome said with a smile, if their owners are going to jail, these dogs are going to need a new home. I know some people who work with animals. Maybe we can find them a family that will teach them to be gentle instead of scary. Riley watched all of this happening and felt amazed. Just an hour ago, these dogs had been the scariest things she had ever seen. Now Jerome was petting them like they were puppies, and they seemed to love him. Officer Thompson came back over to Riley with more news. I called your grandmother, she said. She's very worried about you, but she's also very proud of how brave you were. She's coming to pick you up right now. Riley felt relief wash over her like a warm wave. Soon she would be back with Nana, safe in their little house, and this whole terrible experience would be over. But before that happened, Jerome and Virgil had something special they wanted to do. Jerome knelt down beside Riley one more time and pulled something out of his pocket. It was a small card with his picture on it. This is my wrestling card, he said. I want you to keep it, and I want you to remember something important. Riley took the card and looked at it carefully. It showed Jerome in his wrestling outfit looking strong and confident. What should I remember? She asked quietly. I want you to remember that there are good people in this world, Jerome said. People who will stand up for you when you need help. People who won't let bullies win. Virgil knelt down on Riley's other side and also gave her a card with his picture on it. And I want you to remember that being different doesn't make you less important, he said. You have just as much right to walk down any street in this town as anyone else. Don't let anybody tell you different. Riley looked at both cards and then at the two big men who had saved her. She still couldn't quite believe that famous wrestlers had stopped to help her. Why did you help me? She asked. You don't even know me. Jerome smiled. Because that's what good people do, sweetheart. They help each other. It doesn't matter if you're famous or not, big or small, young or old. When someone needs help, you help them. Virgil nodded. Besides, we both have little girls at home. We'd want someone to help them if they were in trouble. Just then, Riley heard a familiar voice calling her name. She looked up to see Nana hurrying down the street as fast as her old legs could carry her. Riley had never been so happy to see anyone in her entire life. Nana, she called out, and ran toward her grandmother. Nana scooped Riley up in a big hug that seemed to make all the fear and worry disappear. She held her granddaughter tight and whispered, Thank God you're safe, baby girl. Thank God you're safe. Officer Martinez came over to talk to Nana while she was still hugging Riley. Mrs. Johnson, he said, your granddaughter is very lucky. These two gentlemen showed up just in time to help her. Nana looked at Jerome and Virgil with tears in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You saved my baby. No thanks needed, ma'am, Jerome replied. We were just doing what anyone should do. But Nana wouldn't accept that. She walked over to both men and gave them each a hug that was almost as big as the one she had given Riley. You are heroes, she said firmly. Real heroes. And we will never forget what you did today. The police officers had finished arresting the motorcycle riders by now. Bobby, the bearded leader, was being put into one police car. Danny and the third man were being put into another car, but they would probably get in less trouble because they had cooperated with the police. The dogs were being taken to the animal shelter, where Jerome had promised to make sure they found good homes with people who would treat them right. Officer Martinez came over to Jerome and Virgil before they left. "I want to thank you, gentlemen," he said. "Not many people would have stopped to help, especially when they were outnumbered like that. You did a brave thing today." "Just glad we were in the right place at the right time," Virgil replied. As the police cars drove away with the motorcycle riders inside, Riley felt like she could finally breathe normally again. The scary men were gone, the dogs were gone, and she was safe with Nana and her two heroes. Jerome and Virgil walked with Riley and Nana back toward their house on Cherry Street. They wanted to make sure she got home safely and that there were no other troublemakers around. On the way, Nana told them all about Riley, how she was a good student, how she helped around the house, and how she was the light of her grandmother's life. "She's going to be something special when she grows up," Nana said proudly. "She already is something special," Jerome replied. "She handled that whole situation with more courage than most adults would have." When they reached the little white house on Cherry Street, Nana insisted that Jerome and Virgil come inside for some sweet tea and apple pie. They tried to say they needed to get back on the road, but Nana wouldn't take no for an answer. "You saved my grandbaby," she said. "The least I can do is feed you some pie." So the four of them sat around Nana's small kitchen table, eating apple pie and drinking sweet tea, while Riley told her grandmother the whole story of what had happened. Jerome and Virgil stayed for almost 2 hours, making sure Riley felt completely safe and telling her stories about their travels around the country. They made her laugh with funny stories about wrestling matches and the interesting people they had met. When it was finally time for them to leave, Riley walked them out to their RV. She was carrying the 2 wrestling cards they had given her, holding them carefully like they were made of gold. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. Jerome smiled. "You never know, sweetheart. We travel all over the place. Maybe we'll come back through Millerville someday." "And even if we don't," Virgil added, "you'll always know that you have friends out there thinking about you, friends who care about you and want you to be safe and happy." Riley hugged both of them one more time, and then she and Nana watched as the big RV drove away down Cherry Street. That night, as Riley got ready for bed, she put the 2 wrestling cards on her nightstand where she could see them. They reminded her that even when things seem scary and hopeless, sometimes heroes show up just when you need them most. Years later, when Riley became a teacher herself, she would tell her students this story. She would tell them about the day when she learned that real heroes don't always wear capes or have superpowers. Sometimes they're just good people who choose to help when help is needed. And she would always end the story the same way. "Remember, kids, you can be a hero too. All you have to do is help someone when they need it. Stand up for what's right and never let bullies win." The 2 wrestling cards still sit on Riley's dresser today, more than 30 years later. They remind her every day that there are good people in the world and that sometimes when you need them most, heroes really do appear.